Hey, writers, one of the biggest temptations in writing a novel is wanting to explain everything up front. You've built this rich character history. You know everything about the character. You understand their wounds, their fears, their failures and insecurities, their dreams. So when you sit down to write the opening pages, it feels like the reader needs to know all that. But here's the truth. Backstory should be limited as much as possible in story opening, because your job in the first chapter is not to explain, it's to engage a reader. A key part of your story setup, which is in the beginning, is to introduce the character. But if we do that in a way that drags the pace because we're explaining what happened in the past, it defeats the purpose of keeping readers engaged. So let's talk about how to handle backstory so it strengthens your story opening instead of bogging it down. The best way to do this is to only include backstory when the reader needs it to understand what's going on in that moment. That's rule number one. James Scott Bell takes it a step further. He says that strategic backstory, that's what he calls it, should only be included if it bonds the reader to your character. So before you start explaining their past trauma or their complicated history with the opposite sex, ask yourself, does the reader need this right now to understand what's happening? Is this backstory going to create reader empathy? If the answer is no, cut it. And if killing your darlings makes you nervous, don't delete it. Just save it in a file somewhere, and you can use that as a reference to remind you of your character's story. If the answer is yes, and you need to keep the backstory, then you need to trim it down to the absolute minimum. Provide just enough information so readers aren't confused, and do it in an interesting way that's going to keep them glued to the page. So rule number two, instead of dumping a big chunk of it into the opening scene, show it through what's already happening in that scene. Let it come up during an argument. Reference it quickly in a character's thoughts. Bring it up while they're doing something active. So it's not a lengthy flashback or a big blog of inner dialogue that, nothing is going on. For example, instead of giving readers a full page about the character's fear of abandonment, show their overreaction when someone is late to meet them. Provide just a glimpse into their thoughts that show readers there's the past event tied to that fear. Embedding the backstory into the current story makes it feel like part of the scene instead of a lecture about the past. Rule number three, when you're sharing backstory, get in, get out. Readers don't need the full history. And if you try to include it all, they're going to get bored and drop out. Hints and clues are much better because they encourage reader intrigue. That's going to make them want to read on to figure out what's happening. So you can show your character's overreaction to a simple event. Show their discomfort when a certain person is mentioned, hesitation in the conversation, something they refuse to think about. Small clues create depth without putting readers to sleep. You can layer in more details later once readers are fully invested and more information is needed. So bottom line, backstory doesn't really belong in your story opening, so only include it if it's necessary for readers in that moment. And then do it right. Pare it down to the bare minimum, slip it into the current story, no info dumps, no flashbacks. Just make it part of what's happening to the character, and readers are going to be all in. Opening scenes are tough, I get it. So I've gathered a bunch of our best first page resources to make them easier. The link's below. Happy writing.